What's happening, guys? Welcome back. Welcome back. I hope everyone has been well. On this segment, let's talk about who is the real UFC heavyweight champ. Will the real UFC heavyweight champ please stand up? Now, what I'm talking about is Tom Aspinall winning the interim heavyweight championship. He believes that he is the true heavyweight champ. Some of the fans believe that. With Jon Jones being injured, Tom Aspinall has called for Jon Jones to relinquish his belt. So there's that. Then let's go back further. Let's talk about Francis Ngannou not being defeated for his belt. Him and the UFC parted ways. He left with the heavyweight championship basically. So I'm sure there are some fans that think Francis Ngannou is the actual UFC heavyweight champ, even though he's not with the organization anymore. All right, so let's dive into this. Okay, so this is like very layered. There are several ways to look at this. Starting with Francis Ngannou being the UFC heavyweight champ, he has a contract dispute with the UFC. They can't come to terms. I don't want to open up that can of worms, but him and the UFC, they part ways. He was the last UFC heavyweight champ and he wasn't defeated. He didn't lose his belt via competition. Then you have Jon Jones facing Ciryl Gane for the new UFC heavyweight belt that's up for grabs. Jon Jones, of course, steamrolls Ciryl Gane, wins that belt. Then the UFC sets up Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic, which I think is a great legacy super fight for the two. They both deserve that fight for each other. They have nothing else to prove fighting any young contenders. That's a good matchup. But Jon Jones tears his pec. That's a significant injury. He's going to be out for a bit. So what do? The UFC has Tom Aspinall face Sergey Pavlovich, and that one is for the interim belt. Now, there's a section of fans out there that think Tom Aspinall is the actual heavyweight champ right now. You got Daniel Cormier, who I think had that position pretty much. I know Henry Cejudo was going back and forth with him, diminishing Tom Aspinall's belt and win. And he's like, no, Tom Aspinall has to beat Jon Jones to be considered the UFC heavyweight champ. And I have to say, I think I agree with Henry Cejudo. Jon Jones is still an active fighter in the UFC. He will return. But here's the thing. So like, if they're going to book Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic, which I think is the right fight, and those guys should both retire after that matchup, I think that's a great wrap up to both of their careers. Once again, they're deserving of this super fight. So it's like, would Jon Jones fight Tom Aspinall anyway after the Stipe fight? Or do they book Stipe versus Aspinall and then the winner of that gets Jon Jones? But in some respects, I don't even think that's fair to Stipe. We all know that Stipe Miocic is pretty much out the door. Should he be fighting a young new breed of UFC heavyweight that's super well-rounded and a physical specimen, fresh like Tom Aspinall? Stipe is like what, in his 40s right now. He's had a long storied career. I don't think that's fair for him. I think the right course of action is to have Stipe Miocic fight Jon Jones. So in the meantime, what does that mean? Tom Aspinall is the interim champ? Well, yeah. Until Jon Jones comes back and fights Stipe, which shouldn't be over a year. I'm not quite sure the exact recovery time for a torn pec. It might be 6 months to 8 months. And that sucks for Tom Aspinall because what? Does he just wait? Does he fight? You know, life isn't fair sometimes. It sucks. Tough position. Tom Aspinall was calling for Jon Jones to give up the belt. And it's like, I could kind of see his point because Jon doesn't really need the belt to have that super fight with Stipe. And I don't even think Stipe cares about the belt. I think he cares about beating Jon Jones, who's considered the greatest of all time in mixed martial arts by many, many fans. That is his belt, getting that win over Jon Jones. And the same could be said for Jones, beating Stipe. Stipe is widely considered the greatest heavyweight of all time in the UFC. So that's a tremendous feather in Jon Jones's cap. The guy's done it all. He's won belts up the wazoo. But going back to Francis, it's like, yup, he left a heavyweight champ. He wasn't defeated. But the more time that goes by, you really don't view Francis as the champ anymore. Now, if he comes back to the UFC, that's a different story. Then the vibe is going to kind of be like, well, this is the real UFC heavyweight champ who is back. Let's see if the current guy holding the belt can beat him. Yes, that would be that scenario and storyline. But Francis fighting in the UFC, very far-fetched, so we can't even think about him at this point. So at this point, no, I don't consider Francis the quote real UFC heavyweight champ. If he comes back, probably. So as far as Jon Jones, Stipe, Jon's injury, Tom Aspinall in the mix. At first, when I read Tom Aspinall calling for Jon to give up the title, I was like, I don't know. But now that I think about it, it kind of makes sense. So on one hand, I could see the UFC making Tom Aspinall sit it out, let Jon Jones come back as the champ because that's going to make the most money for that super fight against Stipe. I mean, it's a smart business move. It's not going to be good for Aspinall, but I could very well see that scenario happening. Or it could be Jon Jones, either he himself gives up the title and the belt, or the UFC nudges him to do that to have the division move along. Then Jon has his fight with Stipe. They both ride off into the sunset, and Tom Aspinall in the UFC heavyweight division carries on. But ultimately, who do I see as the real champ right now? I'm still going to say Jon Jones right now over Francis, because Francis, I just don't see him in the picture. He's just not involved with the UFC at all. If he comes back, that's a different story. Tom Aspinall, I consider him the interim champ. Jon, even injured, I believe is the true UFC heavyweight champ right now. But let's see what happens. Let's see how long his recovery time is. And if it's like an absurd amount of time, the UFC in the division may have to move past Jon. And then he's just going to have his super fight with Stipe, and there's that. But guys, let me know in the comment section. I have some questions for you. Who do you consider the actual UFC heavyweight champ? Do you consider Francis to be the champ, Tom Aspinall, or Jon Jones? A little explanation as to why would be cool as well. Your whole rationale. What should the UFC do? What should Jon Jones do? Should he give up his belt? Should he hold on to it? Should he make Tom Aspinall remain the interim and just wait it out? It's a messy situation for sure. Thanks for listening, guys. Appreciate it. Happy holidays for those that celebrate. Take care of yourselves, stay safe, and I'll catch you guys on the next segment. Until then, take care, my friends.